Okay, so today I actually thought about spicing things up just a little, and I actually thought about doing this video for ages and ages ago, but now's the only time and the only opportunity that I have to actually make such a video. So without further ado, I want to actually make a video about a modern day lens and comparing it to a vintage lens. Now in this case it's the 51.2 versus this old vintage lens by Olympus, and this is a 51.4. Now let's just see how good or how bad does this lens stack up to a modern equivalent. So let's go straight in.
Okay, so let's first look at the build quality of these older lenses compared to the new ones. With these older lenses, the first thing that you will definitely see is just how solid the construction of the lens feels. Lenses of this era hardly used any rubber at all on them, and I suppose that is perhaps why they have lasted so long. One of the things that I admire about these older lenses also is the fact that how jewel-like these lenses really look and feel in the hand. It really looks like a piece of jewelry, with its diamond pattern focusing ring and engraved focus points. I mean, it's simply breathtaking. Lenses of this era too were very small and compact because they didn't need to be big, simply because of the fact that they didn't have any autofocus. So because of that, they didn't need the excess space for putting a motor inside of them, and hence why they look really good and sleek in the hand. Be warned though, with these vintage lenses, everything you do has to be driven manually, whether it's the aperture or whether it's the focusing. Every single thing that you do has to be done by yourself. And I guess that's what makes using vintage lenses so nice. There's a sense of occasion when you use them. Unlike most modern lenses, vintage lenses are more engaging. Moving on, now let's look at its modern equivalent, the 50mm 1.2 by Canon. I guess the first thing that really screams about modern lenses is the fact that now, instead of just using things manually, there's the whole convenience of autofocus. Now that's where the whole ball game changes. Another great thing about using modern lenses is the fact that all your metadata will be kept, and you can always use it as a form of reference to what the settings were when you were shooting. You're definitely not going to get all those metadata if you're using a vintage lens, so do bear that in mind. With modern lenses, it's definitely a more comfortable experience focusing your lens. Instead of bare metal, now you have rubberized focusing rings. Most modern lenses come with weather sealing as standard. This actually means that you can use these lenses in more harsher environments where it might be dusty or even humid, and you don't have to worry about the lens getting damaged. With modern lenses, the coating technology of lenses has improved drastically. But just how much has it really improved? The only way to tell whether or not a modern lens is way better than the vintage lens that we have here is to do a direct comparison, and that's exactly what we're gonna do. The photograph on the left is from the Canon, and on the right is from the Olympus. In the example you see, I kept the aperture the same, but I used the camera's metering to keep the exposure right. With the Olympus, somehow the color looks a lot warmer, and it's got a nice milky sort of quality about the image. On the Canon, somehow the contrast seems to be handled a lot better, and you get less contrast and less detail somehow. Like this part here, you can see that somehow the edges don't really translate that clearly compared to the Canon lens. In this part of the image, you clearly can see the difference between the detail the Canon renders compared to the vintage lens. With the vintage lens, it is really sort of like all the way milky, and you can't really see much detail. Now, this is what they both look like stopped down to f2. Everything's starting to look sharper, and you can almost not be able to discriminate which lens is which, so that's quite interesting to find out. However, this part here, the vintage lens, still doesn't get to render the details as well as the 51.2. In this other example, you can still see that the vintage lens renders things a lot warmer, but generally the image quality in this particular picture is pretty much the same overall. However, I did notice some parts where there was chromatic aberrations on the modern lens that didn't really appear on the vintage lens, or in some ways it was slightly less. I guess what this clearly illustrates is the fact that the 51.2 may handle certain areas better than the 51.4 and also vice versa. So what that means is that it's not one lens is totally better than the other. It really is dependent upon the subject that you're shooting. And also it does depend on whether you want autofocus or you don't really mind manual focusing. In this image example, the aperture was stopped down to f2.8. I really did find it quite difficult to distinguish which one was a lot clearer, but I reckon in some instances, in some areas of the shot, I would clearly say that for whatever reason, the vintage lens did look a bit sharper. And it performed a lot better than I actually expected, which is quite interesting indeed. I guess in this particular test, this is where we can really tell the difference between a modern lens and also a vintage lens. The vintage lens has significantly more lens flaring compared to the modern lens, and that's pretty much to be expected, I guess. However, to be really honest with you, I really don't mind a bit of lens flaring because it sort of like creates a nice sort of character to the images or the video that you take, so I'm cool with that. So in conclusion, which lens do I think is better in my opinion? I guess the first thing that comes to mind, if you really have a tight budget, then a vintage lens will definitely save you a whole lot of money. Generally, they cost only a fraction of what you would be paying for an equivalent focal range of a new lens. Here are some things worth noting while deciding on which lens to get. In my opinion, if you are seeking for a look that looks very clean and generally sharper overall, perhaps the modern lens would suit your purposes way better than using a vintage lens. The type of subject matter you shoot too will help you decide what lens best suits your needs. If you're shooting a subject matter that moves a lot, or shooting in constantly changing environments, or shooting very important events where you don't have much room to make a mistake, then a lens that has autofocus and that can quickly electronically adjust aperture settings is essential and would suit your shooting needs way better. In short, there's no real right or wrong lens to use. It really is up to you and what kind of look you're going for. For me, I choose vintage lenses when I know I have the time or when I want to be a little bit more adventurous. Because mixing things here and there is just like using spices while you cook. It keeps the dish tasty. Hope this short comparison video I made will make you understand just some of the differences you can expect when shooting with a vintage lens and a modern lens. Anyway, a lens is merely a tool, so it really depends on what kind of desired look you really want to achieve. So if you did like this video, do give us a like and please do subscribe to our channel for more content like this. See you guys in the next video then.